weren't supposed to have a king. They were supposed to allow God to be their king. But they kept begging for a king, and so God told the spiritual eagle Samuel, okay, fine, give them what they want. And now they've appointed Saul, the king over Israel. And at this point, Saul's been the king about 2 years, and where our lesson begins today. Last week we saw where he was anointed the king, and this week we're going to see where Saul becomes, not the same one, sorry, where Saul becomes disobedient under pressure. You know, some people, there's always those people that thrive under pressure, that they do better under pressure, and then there's some people that buckle under pressure. There's instances where I've done both in my life, actually. There's instances where I've done really well under pressure, and there's times in my life where I've buckled under the pressure. But if we'll follow God in our life and do what He wants us to do, He will give us the power to lift the weight that's upon us, right? And carry the weight. I had not planned on using this illustration until just now, but when I was younger, I used to work out and lift weights. And sometimes I would be pumping iron, you know, and you get on about that 10th or 11th repetition, and all of a sudden the weight is way too much to handle, and you're pushing as hard as you can, and you can't quite get it up. And you never really want to work out by yourself. You need somebody there with you, or it's dangerous. That weight could fall on you and crack your sternum, or fall in your neck and choke you, and so it can be dangerous to work out by yourself. So you have what's called a spotter there. And that spotter, when you got giving it everything you got and you can't quite get the weight up, that spotter you say, okay, help me out. And he's right there to help you out. And he can take that weight and he can lift it up and he can set it back on the rack for you. And that's what God can do for us. When the weight of the world is upon us, when it's too much for us to handle anymore, it's so much we can't push it up, God can take it and He just lift it up, set it back on the rack. And that's how God's grace works for us. If we'll just follow Him and allow Him to be there for us, He's always right there for us. So this week we're talking about Saul and how he buckled under the pressure. He couldn't handle it. He didn't really rely on God. He was impatient, is what this particular lesson is about. Have you ever been impatient? Look at her. She's quick to raise her hand. She always was. I've been impatient before. It's not always easy to be still and wait on the Lord.
I want patience and I want it right now.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. Lord, give me patience and give it to me now. And so, and here we see that's what's happened here with Saul. We find that at this time he's been the king of Israel for a couple of years. The first year he had spent learning how to be the king. I can imagine that he'd never trained to be a king. He'd never been in this type of atmosphere before. And so now he's the leader of a nation. He has 3,000 soldiers at this time ready to fight and protect Israel at all times. Kind of like an honor guard. They're always ready. Even in times of peace, they're ready just in case they fall under attack. If a war broke out, they would be prepared. One thing, and right now, one thing I've learned about Israel during this time is there's some peaceful times, but it seems like it never lasts very long, does it? There's always another war, another battle to be fought right around the corner because they were constantly under attack. Do you ever feel like that in your own personal life? Things are going along pretty smooth for a while, and then here comes the devil, and he wants to attack us, and he wants to destroy us, and he wants us to make us buckle under the pressure, doesn't he? And so, the Bible teaches us that there is nothing that God will put on us that we can't bear as long as we have Him to help us and let Him be our guide. Now, a lot of people misquote that, and they say, there's nothing God will give you that you can't handle. There's a lot of things that we go through that we couldn't handle alone. But there's a lot of things that happen to us that we can always handle with God. Because there's nothing He can't handle, right?
Amen.
So, we begin our lesson in 1 Samuel chapter number 13, verse number 5. It says, so we've just finished a time where Israel's got an army, Saul's the king, and once again, here come old Philistines. It says, and the Philistines gathered themselves together to fight with Israel. 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. And they came up and pitched in Michmash, eastward from Bethlehem. Saul had moved to Gilgal from Michmash, and these Philistines mentioned above are a large, obviously, very well-equipped army. Here we are, we see Saul's army, and how many we said a while ago? 3,000 at this point, the honor guard, and we see an army of 30,000 Philistines. And how would you feel if you were in an army of 3,000 and you were about to be attacked by an army of 30,000 with all the equipment and all the forces that be, chariots and horsemen, and all of these tools of armor ready to attack you? I'll tell you, we would probably respond just like the children of Israel did in this next verse. It says, when the men of Israel saw that they were straight, that they were in a strait, which means they were in difficulty, for the people were distressed, and then the people did hide themselves in caves and in thickets and in rocks and in high places and in pits. So we see that the people of Israel were in fear, weren't they? They'd forgotten what God had done for them in the past, where they defeated the Ammonites, and they're very afraid of this war machinery. And so they run, they tuck tail and run, and they hide. And they go out into the hills and into the caves. And remember, Saul had 2,000 chosen men for himself stationed there to fight, and then the other 1,000 had gone out to be with the Benjamite area. And so in 1 Samuel 13:7 it says, and of some of the Hebrews went over to Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. As for Saul, he was yet in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. So there were some people that didn't go and hide out in caves. They didn't tuck tail and run, but they were there with Saul. And it seems that they quickly ran to Gilgal, where Saul had gone to bring the Hebrew army together. Some of the Hebrews had gone over to Jordan and hid in Gad and Gilead. But we see here they may be there, but they're trembling. They're not very brave, are they? They don't really have the Spirit of the Lord upon them right now. They don't have the Spirit of the next king in line, do they? Who's the next king in line? David. Well, wouldn't it be good if we could all have the Spirit of David had when he was a child? But we see grown men that are trembling and afraid. And so we see here that the people are in fear for their lives. They don't want to be defeated by the Philistines. But then they've forgotten the power of God that brought them through over and over and over in the past. What we always say, fear is the opposite of faith, right? And like Zach Williams sings in that song, fear is a liar, right? And who is the father of lies? Satan is the father of lies. So when you live in fear, you're doing exactly what Satan wants you to do. We see here that they're not listening to God, are they? And so this is where good leadership is essential, right? And Saul is supposed to be their military leader, and he's supposed to be following the wisdom of Samuel, who is their spiritual leader, right? Saul is their king, but Samuel has still been their spiritual leader all this time. And so Saul, over the next few verses, we see where Saul is also going to give in fear. In chapter 13, verse number 8, it says, and he tarried 7 days according to the set time that Samuel had appointed. So Samuel had talked to Saul and said, now you need to wait 7 days. But Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. It seems that, so Samuel had advised Saul to stay there 7 days at Gilgal. Samuel had not gone with them to Gilgal, and this would be Israel's, at this time war for independence against the Philistines. In verse number 9 it says, and Saul said, bring hither a burnt offering to me and peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. So he was supposed to be waiting on Samuel to come and offer up this burnt offering, okay? It appears that Saul decided that Samuel wasn't coming, and he offered the burnt offerings himself. And fear keeps us from waiting on the Lord, doesn't it? We get ahead of God. We studied it. I mean, there's that recurring theme over and over that we're supposed to wait on the Lord. Be still and wait on the Lord. We can't get ahead of God. When we do, bad things happen. And so we see this happen again. He was afraid to wait on the spiritual leader Samuel. So in essence, he was afraid to wait on the Lord. And he gets out ahead and he goes ahead and offers the burnt offering in advance. We want what God has for us right now. A lot of times we're like the prodigal son, aren't we? We want it and we want it now. And Saul is afraid and he does not follow the advice of the man of God in Samuel, the spiritual leader. In verse number 10 it says, and it came to pass as soon as he made an end of offering, the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. And Saul went out to meet him, that he might salute him. Saul doesn't even realize I don't guess Saul really even realized he'd done anything wrong at this point. And,
if you were to give that spirit, like out on the street this week, and you were to give that message to a group of non-believers, they'd go, well, he did a good thing.
Exactly.
But they're missing the point.
Yeah.
God said not to.
Exactly. When God told him he's not supposed to do it. It's supposed to be Samuel's job. And so we see that Saul still, like Samuel, for Samuel to decide many things that they did. I don't know if he wanted to make sure that these were in the will, that he was in the will of God, but he was probably still a little unsure of himself at times. He hadn't been the king very long. And this is the 7th day that Samuel had told them to wait. And Saul runs out to meet him to receive a blessing. He's excited. He's like, I've done this burnt offering. I'm going to go out and meet Samuel. I'm going to get a blessing for what I've done. It's good stuff, right? But instead, it says in verse 11, it says, and Samuel said, what hast thou done? And Saul said, because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou camest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together in this match. So instead of a blessing, Saul receives what? A reprimand. He gets in trouble. He gets scolded a little bit. The 7 days had been a test for Saul. And Saul failed the test, didn't he? Saul got impatient. And a lot of times when we get impatient, we sin, don't we? Because we're not waiting on the Lord. Impatience will lead us to sin a lot of times. And he offered the burnt offering for himself. And Samuel can't believe that Saul would take it upon himself to offer that sacrifice. Saul was a civil leader, right? We talked about it. He's not the spiritual leader. And he had no right to sacrifice. We see that Saul gives excuses, some of them that aren't true. Right? Samuel did come on the 7th day. He didn't even wait all 7 days, did he? It says on there that Samuel actually showed up on the 7th day. And Saul didn't even wait. As he had said he would. He even had not, but we know that Saul should not have been the one to offer that sacrifice. So in verse number 12 it says, therefore said I, the Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal, and I have not made supplication unto the Lord. I forced myself therefore and offered a burnt offering. So we see here that perhaps it's Saul's fear of what was about to happen with the Philistine that made him do this. Saul felt that the sacrifice should be made before the battle. And the Philistines were bearing down upon him. So in this moment of fear, he did a bad thing, didn't he? Fear will cause us to make a bad decision. Samuel 13:13 says, and Samuel said to Saul, thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee, for now will the Lord have established thy kingdom upon Israel forever. most important thing Saul could have done was to listen to Samuel. He was the spiritual leader. He's the one that knew the will of God. And so when you listen to Samuel, in essence, it was following the will of God. Samuel was in charge of spiritual matters, and he should have done exactly what Samuel commanded him to do. But he had broken the commandment of the Lord that was spoken through Samuel. This means that Saul's kingship is not going to last anymore. It's not going to last forever. He'll be replaced by someone that is pleasing to God. It says, 1 Samuel 13:14 says, "But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought a man after his own heart. And the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee." Now who is this talking about? David. Who's the man after God? The man after God's own heart is David. This is talking about God is about to choose David, who would be a mere child at this time. David's very young. God knows the end as well as the beginning, doesn't he? He sees the whole picture. That's one of the problems is we can't see the whole picture. That's one of the reasons we always want to get out and be impatient and get ahead of God. Because we can't see the whole picture. But if we'll just be still and wait on God and let Him guide us, then everything will come into focus. It'll be a perfect picture if we can wait on the Lord. Even though David hasn't been anointed yet, God knows that he will be. God's disappointment in Saul is shown through Samuel's words here. Certainly the man that God would choose would not be perfect. Is any of us perfect? No. None of us are perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. But what God's looking for is a man after his own heart. David makes mistakes. He makes multiple mistakes over and over and over again. But he is a man after God's own heart. Certainly, the man God would choose wouldn't be perfect, but he would love God. And that's the most important thing, is that you choose someone that truly loves the Lord. And he's someone who tries. We cannot keep God's commandments, can we? If we could keep God's commandments, we wouldn't have needed Christ, would we? So none of us can keep God's commandments. But God's looking for people who at least make an effort to try to keep His commandments and live and abide in Him and follow His will in their lives. So, anyway, we see here that Saul buckled under the pressure. He was impatient, and impatience leads to sin. And sin will take you out of the will of God and will keep you from doing what He wants you to do. All right, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, we thank you for this day. Thank you for these true stories in the Bible that are a reflection of ourselves and how we live our lives, Lord. And they teach us how that we can do better. Lord, I ask today that you will be in our service, that you'll be with those that are here this morning, that we might receive a blessing from you, Lord, and help us to do your will in everything, in every facet of this service, Lord. And Lord, I pray that you'll be with the song service and in the preaching hour, Lord, that you will give Brother Mike the power to preach, that we might let him get a little glimpse of you, Lord. And we'll give you the praise for it in Jesus' holy and precious name we ask it.